From a Bigfoot protecting a kid, a dog man seen by a truck driver deep in Alaska, to a hidden Bigfoot bloodline in northern Maine, our woods are much stranger than we thought. The footage is 40 seconds long. I have watched it more times than I am willing to admit, and I still cannot explain what is on it. It opens on a county road at night, snow coming down hard sideways the way it does up north in a real storm. 2 headlight beams cutting a tunnel into the white, the dash of a plow truck glowing faint and green at the bottom of the frame, a timestamp burning in the corner, 2 a.m. For the first few seconds, it is nothing. Just the road, just the snow pouring through the lights and the black wall of forest sliding past on both sides. And then, at the right edge of the frame, just past where the good light reaches, something stands up out of the dark. It is tall. Too tall, upright, on 2 legs, hugging the tree line. And it does not cross the road the way an animal crosses a road. It turns and it starts to move in the same direction as the truck, down the road, keeping pace. You can watch the speedometer in the corner of that dash, 30, 35, 40. The numbers climb, and the shape on the right does not fall behind. In a foot of snow on an unplowed shoulder at 40 miles an hour, it stays exactly level with the cab, holding its distance, like it is tied to the truck by a string. And once, for less than a second, the side light catches it turning its head, looking back, looking in. That is the footage. That is what a snowplow driver in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan caught on a camera his county bolted to his truck for insurance reasons on a night he almost did not work. He sent it to me a few weeks ago. He did not want anything for it. He did not ask me to use his name. He just said he had carried it alone long enough, and he needed one other person to look at it and not turn away. I am not going to tell you his name. I am not going to tell you the exact county or the exact stretch of road. He asked me not to, and after hearing the whole thing, I understand why. But I'm going to tell you everything else, because the 40 seconds is only the part the camera caught. The rest of it, the part that actually changed him, the part he does not drive nights anymore because of, he had to tell me himself. So let me walk you through it the way he walked me through it from the beginning. I want you to understand the man first before you see the thing, because the thing is easy. The thing you will not believe. The man is the part that makes it real. He is not a believer. He told me that more than once, almost like he needed me to hear it. He is not the kind of guy who watches this stuff. He does not go looking for monsters. He has never in his life called into a radio show or posted in a forum or stood around a fire telling a story like this. He works for a living. He plows snow. He fixes his own truck in his own garage. He has a wife and grown kids and a dog. And the most exciting thing that has ever happened to him on the job, up until that night, was hitting a deer. That is the kind of man this is. 19 winters on the same routes. He knows every curve, every dip, every spot where the road ices first and thaws last. He knows where the deer cross and where the coyotes den, and where, in the spring, you will see a bear come down off the ridge looking for whatever the winter left behind. He has seen wolves, real ones. He wants you to know that because later it matters. He knows exactly what a wolf looks like crossing a road in the dark, eyes flat and yellow in the headlights, low to the ground, gone in a second. He has seen moose come out of the fog like a wall. He has seen a bobcat sit in the middle of his lane and refuse to move. He has seen a bear stand up on its back legs in his floodlights, and he will tell you that is the closest thing he ever saw to what came later. And it was not close at all. He has counted deer by the dozen on a single shift. He knows their eyes, their height, the dumb way they freeze and then bolt the wrong direction. He has hit a few. He has buried a few off the side of the road with the blade because leaving them is worse. The point is this: there is not an animal that lives in that country he has not seen up close in the dark more times than he can count. He is not a man who is going to mistake a deer for a monster. He has spent 19 years learning the difference between every shape that moves out there. That is why what he saw matters, because he is the last man who should have been fooled, and he is telling you he was not fooled. This was not any of that. The truck is an older tandem axle plow, heavy, loud, the kind of machine that rattles your teeth and warms up slow and smells like diesel and old vinyl. It has a dash camera bolted up near the mirror. He did not put it there to catch anything. The county put it there. After a driver on another route clipped a moose a few years back and the insurance turned into a nightmare, they wired cameras into the whole fleet. Liability, nothing more. So there is a camera running every shift, pointed straight out the windshield whether he thinks about it or not. He mostly forgot it was there. Most of the guys did. It is just a little black box up by the mirror with a light that you stop seeing after the first week. It records to a card and the card loops, writing over itself. So unless something happens, unless there is a wreck or a claim, the footage just erases itself a few days later and no one ever looks at it. Thousands of hours of empty road recorded and wiped forever. That is the only reason any of this exists. He pulled the card before it could loop over itself. If he'd waited another 2 days, there would be nothing. No file, no proof, just a story a tired plow driver tells that no one would ever have to believe. He thinks about that too, how close the whole thing came to simply being erased, the way the world erases almost everything that does not fit. I want you to hold on to that. The camera was not looking for a monster. The camera was looking at the road, the way it looked at the road every single night because a bean counter somewhere decided it should. That is why this footage exists at all, not because anyone was hunting for proof, because of paperwork. The night it happened was a call out. A lake effect band had set up over the big water and was dragging straight inland the way they do up there. Heavy, wet, relentless. The kind of snow that does not fall so much as it arrives sideways in walls. When that happens, the county calls a night crew in whether they like it or not. The roads have to stay open, ambulances have to get through. So at a little before midnight, his phone rang, and he got dressed in the dark, and he kissed his wife, and he went out into it. He told me he almost did not go. Not because of any feeling, nothing like that, no premonition. He is not that kind of man, and he wants you to know it. Just because the storm was bad and the route was long and he was tired, and a part of him, the ordinary part, wished he could roll over and let it be somebody else's problem. He has thought about that 100 times since. The version of that night where he calls in and stays home. The version where another man is in that truck instead. He does not let himself think about that one for long, but he went because that is who he is. The phone rang and the roads needed clearing, and he went. He told me the first couple of hours were nothing, and I want to spend a second on that nothing because the nothing is important. It was just the route, just the work, the wipers slapping, the headlights carving a tunnel into the white, the plow throwing a wave of snow off into the ditch, the radio crackling now and then with another driver somewhere across the county, empty road, walls of falling snow on both sides, the heater running, the same curves he had taken 1,000 times. He had a thermos of coffee going cold in the cup holder. He had the same playlist he always ran on storm nights, low, half ignored. He had the window cracked an inch the way he likes it, just enough to feel the cold air and stay sharp. He told me there is a rhythm to it that anyone who has done it will recognize. You stop thinking. Your hands run the truck and your eyes run the road and your mind goes somewhere quiet and warm. Drop the blade, lift the blade, Watch the markers take the curve. Hour after hour. It is almost peaceful. That is the thing people do not get. A storm at 2 a.m, alone in a warm cab with the whole white world rolling past, can be one of the most peaceful places there is. Miles of it. Just plowing, just the hum of a man doing a job he had done half his life. That is the baseline. That is normal. I need you to feel how normal it was, because of how fast it stopped being normal. The first time he saw it, he did not really see it. He was on a long, straight stretch, forest tight on both sides, when something at the edge of his floodlights caught his eye, off to the right, back near the tree line where the plow lights barely reached. Tall, that was the only word he had for it in the moment. Too tall. The proportions wrong in a way he could not name in the half second it was there. And then it was gone, behind him, swallowed by the snow and the dark. He did what you would do, what I would do. He told himself it was a deer standing up on a bank maybe, so it looked taller than it was. Or a trick of the blowing snow, the headlights smearing a shape out of nothing, or just his own eyes, tired, an hour past midnight, staring into white for too long. That is what the mind does. The mind has a list of normal things, and when it sees something that is not on the list, it reaches for the closest thing that is. Deer, snow, tired eyes. He kept driving. He turned the radio up a little. He did not think about it again. For about 4 minutes. I asked him about those 4 minutes because I find them almost unbearable. He said that is the part he would take back if he could. Those 4 minutes where he had already seen it and talked himself out of it, where it was already out there in the dark, keeping pace with him in the trees, and he was sipping cold coffee and half listening to music and thinking about nothing at all. He thinks now that it was watching him that whole time, learning the truck, learning the speed, learning him, and he was giving it everything it needed and did not even know. The second time, it was closer, not at the tree line anymore, at the shoulder, right at the edge of the road where the plowed bank dropped off into the ditch. And this time it was not crossing. That is the thing he kept coming back to when he told me. It was not moving across the road, the way an animal moves when it is going somewhere. It was upright, and it was moving with him, in the same direction, down the road. He let off the gas without even deciding to. The plow slowed, and the shape stayed exactly where it was relative to his window. Off the right side, just past the reach of the good light, pacing. His brain still tried. He told me it tried so hard. Somebody on a snowmobile maybe, running the ditch line. A guy walking, lost, in trouble. He even started to slow down more, the part of him that helps people overriding the part of him that was starting to scream. He told me he actually reached for the door in that moment. The instinct to stop and help a person in a storm is older than fear. His hand went to the handle, and then his eyes went back to the shape, and his hand came off the handle very slowly because his body had understood something his mind had not caught up to yet. People do not move like that. People in the snow are hunched, slow, miserable, fighting for every step. This thing was not fighting the snow. It moved through a foot of it, the way you walk through an empty room. And then it turned its head and looked at him. He could not give me the face. He has watched the footage more times than he can count, and even now he says the snow and the dark eat most of it. But he could give me the motion, the way the head came around on the neck, level, unhurried, and fixed on the cab of his truck. Not startled. Not curious the way an animal is curious, the way a person looks at you across a room when they already know who you are. He told me that was the moment his foot found the gas again on its own. This is where I want to slow down. because this is the part that I think about the most. He sped up. Of course he sped up. Every animal in the world, when a thing like that looks at you, the body picks speed. He brought the plow up to 30. The straightaway let him. The snow was deep, but the truck is heavy and it wanted to go. And the shape on his right kept pace. He told me he looked at the speedometer, 30. He looked at the mirror, still there. He looked back at the road, then back at the mirror, the way you do when your eyes are lying to you and you are waiting for them to admit it. 35, still there. 40, still there. 40 miles an hour in a foot of snow on an unplowed shoulder, and the thing was not falling behind. It was not even working hard. He said that was what broke something in him. Not the size, not the shape, the ease. He kept stealing looks at it. He could not help it, and every look gave him one more detail he did not want. The way the snow it kicked up hung in the air behind it, so he could see the path it had cut. The way it did not bob the way a running animal bobs, but stayed level, smooth, like its head was on rails. The way the floodlight would catch a piece of it and then lose it, catch and lose. So he was building the whole thing in his mind out of flashes. A deer cannot do that. A wolf cannot do that. A man on foot is a joke. A snowmobile would have been throwing a rooster tail of snow he could see. There was nothing under it but its own legs, and it was holding 40 like it was nothing. Like it could have gone faster any time it wanted and was choosing not to. That is the detail that turns this from an animal into something else. The choosing. I keep coming back to the ease myself every time I think about this. Because I've stood at the side of a highway and watched what 40 miles an hour actually is. It is a lot. It is faster than any land animal in that forest can hold for more than a few desperate seconds. A deer can flash across in front of you at that speed and be gone, lungs burning, done. Nothing out there sustains it. Nothing out there does it for fun. Alongside a truck in deep snow with its head turned to watch the man inside. He told me the longer it went on, the calmer it seemed and the less calm he became. That is backwards. That is not how a chase works. In a chase, the hunter burns and the hunted, if it is winning, settles. Here, the man in the warm cab was coming apart, and the thing in the freezing dark was steady as a clock. They had traded places somehow, and he did not understand the rules of the thing that had taken his place, because it was not chasing him. I want to be very clear about that, because he was very clear about it with me. A chase has a feeling. A chase is something trying to catch something. This was not that. It was pacing him, matching him, holding a distance, like there was an invisible line between the truck and the thing had decided exactly how close that line would be. When he sped up, it adjusted. When his foot twitched toward the brake on instinct, when the plow shuddered down a few miles an hour, it eased off too. It stayed in that one spot off his rear quarter, the one spot where the mirror only just barely caught it, like it knew where the mirror reached and chose to live right at the edge of it. You do not do that by accident. You do that when you understand what a mirror is, when you understand what the man inside the truck can and cannot see. He tested it. He did not mean to, but he did. Without thinking, the way you check a sore tooth with your tongue, he drifted the truck a little to the left, toward the center line, putting a little more road between them. And the thing drifted with him. Closed the gap back to exactly what it had been. Not more, not less. The same distance it had chosen. He drifted back right. It gave the distance back, like there was a string between them and it was holding the string at one fixed length no matter what he did. He tried the lights next. There's a switch for the secondary flood, the one that throws light wider, and he hit it, suddenly trying to catch the thing full in the beam. And it stepped back, out of the wider light into the dark at the edge of it. before the light even finished spreading, like it knew the switch was there, like it knew exactly how far that beam would reach and had already decided not to be inside it. That is not instinct. He has watched 1,000 animals react to his lights. They freeze, or they run, or they do not care. None of them step out of a beam a half second before it arrives. You only do that if you understand light. If you understand what a man is trying to do to you, and you decide not to let him. Prey does not study you. Prey runs or prey dies. Prey does not pick the one blind spot and ride it down the road for miles. This thing was not deciding whether to catch him. He is sure of that now. It had already decided it could anytime it liked. It was deciding something else. And he has spent a long time since that night trying not to think about what. The break came at the curve. There is a spot on that route, he told me, where the road bends hard and drops at the same time, and in heavy snow you have to slow down for it, or you'll put the plow in the ditch. 19 winters. He knew it was coming. He had no choice. He had to brake. And for a few seconds, as the truck came down out of 40, the line moved. The thing closed the gap. It came up off the shoulder and onto the cleared edge of the road into the light, closer than it had been the whole night. Close enough that for the length of a breath the floodlights had it. Really had it. He will not give me all of it. I have asked gently and I have stopped asking. He says some of it he will not say out loud because saying it makes it more real than he can carry. But he gave me pieces, the height of it against the side of his truck, which is not a small truck. He told me he keeps trying to make it shorter in his memory and the footage keeps telling him no. Its shoulders were up near the top of his cab. Whatever it was tall enough to look down into the window if it wanted. The way the limbs moved, too many joints or joints in the wrong places, he could not tell but wrong. The front legs or arms, he does not have a word for them, reaching and pulling in a way that was almost graceful and almost human and not quite either. And that almost was the worst part. The fur or the hair, wet and dark and flattened by the snow, so did not look soft. It looked heavy. It looked like something that had been out in the storm for a long time and did not mind. The breath, he could see its breath fogging in the cold, coming fast and even, like a thing that was not even close to tired. He said he will never forget that, as long as he lives. The truck was screaming, the engine, the plow, the wind, and through all of it, he was certain he could see it breathing, calm and steady, while his own breath came in pieces, and lo, a sound under the engine, under the wind, that he felt in his chest more than heard. Not a growl exactly, lower than that, a pressure, the kind of sound you feel in your back teeth and your sternum that your body recognizes as danger before your mind can name it. For those few seconds in the curve, with the truck slowed and the thing in the light, he was closer to it than any person should ever be to whatever that was. And he says the thing did not look afraid, and it did not look angry. It looked patient. He keyed the radio. He told me his hand was not really working right, but he got it and he called out. He said something, anything, into the static. And he got static back. A half a voice, maybe a fragment, swallowed by the storm, and the dead zones that laced that whole stretch of country. No one was coming. No one even knew. That is the part of the Upper Peninsula that people who have not been there do not understand. The aloneness of it. You can be 12 miles from another human being, and it might as well be 1,200. Your headlights are the only light in the world. Your radio is a toy. Whatever is out there with you is the only company you have got. So he made a decision. He did not stop. He did not get out. He did not look at it again, not directly, not once. He came out of the curve and he put his foot down, and he drove. Not for the rest of the route. He told me he does not remember making the choice, but he abandoned the route. He drove for the nearest town, the nearest plowed road, the nearest light, the nearest anything. Those next miles he can barely describe. He had the truck wide open, the plow throwing snow, the engine screaming, and he did not let himself look right, and he did not let himself look in the mirror, because he was afraid of two things equally. He was afraid he would see it still there, and he was afraid he would see that it was gone, and not know when, and never know how close it still might be. He told me he started talking to himself out loud, just saying his own name, his wife's name, the name of the town ahead, anything, a string of normal words to keep the inside of the truck feeling human while the outside of it had stopped being a world he understood. He kept both hands locked on the wheel, and he drove like the road behind him was on fire. And somewhere in those next few miles, the thing fell away behind him. He does not know when, he never saw it leave. There was no moment where it gave up because it had never been trying. It was just there. And then, at some point, it was not. He drove into the edge of that little town with his hands shaking and the heater on full, and he sat in a gas station lot that was closed for the night until the sky started to go gray. And here's the thing that he says is the worst part. Worse than the pacing, worse than the look. It let him go. It could have done more. He knows that the way you know the sun is going to come up. It had the speed, it had the closeness. At that curve, for those few seconds, it had everything it needed, and it chose not to. A thing that could catch you and does not is so much worse than a thing that simply cannot, because it means the not catching was a decision too. It means you are alive because something out there in the dark looked at you and decided, for reasons you will never know, that tonight was not the night. He has to live with having been let go. He did not get to earn it. He did not get to fight it. He just got to keep breathing because a thing on a snowy road decided he could. I do not know how you carry that. He is still figuring it out. And there's a question underneath it that he circles and never lands on, and once he said it to me, I have circled it too. Why him? Why that night? If it could choose, and he is certain it could choose, then there was a reason it let him drive away. And the reason belongs to something whose mind he cannot begin to enter. Maybe he was simply not what it wanted. Maybe it was not hungry, in whatever way a thing like that is hungry. Maybe it was curious, and a curious thing does not always kill the thing it is curious about. Or maybe, and this is the one he hates, maybe it let him go because it did not need to. Because there will be other nights and other storms, and it knows the route now too, and it is patient, and it can wait. He does not know which answer is true. None of them let him sleep. For weeks, he told no one. This is the part I understand the least and believe the most, because it is exactly what real people do. And it is the opposite of what a person making it up would do. A person making it up runs to the internet. A person making it up wants the attention, wants the views, wants the fight in the comments. He did the other thing. He almost deleted it. He sat with that file for days with his thumb over it. He told himself every story he could build, the snow, the lights, the long shift, a wolf at a weird angle, a trick of a tired brain. He wanted more than anything to make it small enough to throw away. But he could not make it small, and he could not delete it, because some part of him knew that if he wiped that file, he would spend the rest of his life not sure if it had ever been real, and that not knowing would be worse than the knowing. So he kept it, and he kept his mouth shut, and he went to work the next storm in the daylight, and the storm after that, and he did not say a word to anyone. He told me what those weeks were actually like, and I want to give them to you because this is the part the footage cannot show. He stopped sleeping right. Not nightmares exactly. He would just come awake at 2 a.m, the same time it happened, wide awake and listening, for nothing, for something, for a sound under the wind that was not there. He started leaving a light on, a grown man 19 winters on the worst roads in the state, leaving the porch light burning all night because the dark outside the window did not feel empty anymore. He did not tell his wife. That was the hardest thing he admitted to me. He has told this woman everything for 30 years, and he could not tell her this because the moment he said it out loud, it would be in the house with them, and he wanted to keep it out of the house. So he carried it alone right next to her every night and said nothing. He found himself doing math at red lights, working out the speed again, 40 miles an hour, a foot of snow, the distance it held. He would run the numbers in his head, trying to find the version where it was an animal, where it was a person, where it was anything that the world already had a name for, and the numbers kept refusing him. And he kept going back to the look, the head coming around level and slow, the patience of it. He told me that in some ways the speed was not even the worst part. The worst part was that it had looked at him like it had all the time in the world, like he was not getting away because he was fast or lucky or smart. He was getting away because it allowed it. He said you can live with being chased. Being chased means you mattered enough to run down. What you cannot easily live with is being spared. Being spared means it weighed you in some way you will never understand and decided you are not worth the trouble, and that is its own kind of wound. What finally broke his silence was small. It usually is. He went back and watched the footage again weeks later, calmer, ready to find the deer in it, ready to be relieved, and instead he found the timestamp. He watched how long the thing stayed in frame, and he did the math against the speed, his own speed, the speed he knows that truck holds because he has held it 10,000 times. And the numbers did not work for any animal that exists. The thing was in his light, holding station for far longer than anything on 4 legs or 2 could have managed at that pace in that snow. The footage knew something his memory had been softening. The footage did not soften anything. The footage just counted. And once you have seen a number, you cannot unsee it. There's one more thing he did that he is almost ashamed of, and that I think is the most human part of the whole account. He went back, in the daylight, on a clear afternoon weeks later, off the clock in his own truck. He drove that stretch of road slow, telling himself he was just looking, just putting it to rest. He found the curve. He found the straightaway. He pulled over at the spot where it had paced him, and he sat there with the engine running, looking at the tree line, at the ditch, at the empty shoulder where a thing had walked beside him at 40 miles an hour and looked into his cab. And in the daylight, it was just woods, just snow and trees and the ordinary quiet of the north. There was nothing there. There's never anything there in the daylight, but he told me he could not make himself get out of the truck. He sat there for a long time, a grown man on an empty road in the middle of the day, and he could not put his hand on the door handle and step out onto that shoulder. Some animal part of him, older than reason, would not allow it. He drove home. He has not gone back since. There were other small things after, once he started very quietly to look. A second driver on a route not far from his, an older guy, who got strange and went quiet when he tried to bring it up over coffee, and changed the subject like a door closing. He told me he never pushed it. The look on the other man's face was enough. It was the look of someone who had also been let go, and had also decided never to talk about it, and did not thank him for bringing it back. A set of tracks in the spring along a stretch of that road that the DNR logged as a large wolf, because large wolf is the box that exists and the truth is not a box that exists. He saw the photos. He says the stride was wrong. The distance between the prints was wrong, too long, the way the speed was too fast. But wrong does not go in a report. Wrong does not have a form to fill out. A story, third hand, about a hunter a few ridges over who came out of the woods one fall and sold his camp and his guns and moved downstate and would not say why. People said he had lost his nerve. He wonders now if the man had simply seen the thing earlier than he did and understood sooner that there was nowhere to take it. That is the quiet horror under all of it, not the creature, the silence around the creature. Because think about where he could take this, who he could tell, the county. He files a report and it goes in a drawer. The DNR, they write down wolf or bear or unknown, and they move on because their whole job is built to explain the world, not to admit there is a part of it that does not fit. The dispatcher who half heard him scream into the radio at 2 a.m. never even wrote it down. Why would she? Static is static. A doctor would have a word for it. A word that means you were tired and frightened and your brain made something out of the snow. A counselor would have a gentle version of the same word. Even his friends, the ones who plow those same roads, would mostly land on some kinder way of saying it did not really happen. There is no one. There is no office. There's no number you call. A man can see something impossible. On a county road, in his own headlights, recorded on a camera the county itself, bolted to his truck, and there is nowhere on this earth to take it where anyone is required to care. And here is the cruelest turn of it. The very thing that should make people believe him, the footage, is the thing that makes it easier to dismiss. Because we all know now what can be done to a video. We all know shapes can be added, dark frames can be faked, snow can hide 1,000 tricks. So the proof becomes the doubt. The evidence becomes the excuse. The harder he tries to show you, the easier you find it to look away. That is the thing that actually keeps him up. Not that it happened and the world had no slot to put it in, and so the world just kept going, plowing its roads, logging its wolves, as if nothing had stood beside him in the snow at all. He told me he sometimes wonders how many others there are. Other night drivers, long-haul guys who run those roads when no one else will. A snowmobile guide he heard about, secondhand, who stopped taking winter clients and would not say why. The Upper Peninsula is a big, dark, old place. It keeps its winters long and its towns small and its secrets, he thinks, very well. He thinks the road remembers things the people on it are not allowed to say. So why did he finally send it to me? I asked him that. It is a question I always come back to. He said it was not to prove anything. He has given up on proving. He knows how this looks. He knows the word people will use for him, and he has made his peace with the word. He sent it because he needed one other person to sit with it the way he has had to sit with it. To watch the thing hold 40 in a foot of snow and look into the cab and choose, and to not look away and to not explain it into nothing. He needed it to be real for somebody else, just one somebody. So he was not the only one carrying it anymore. He said something to me near the end that I have not stopped thinking about. He said the loneliest part was never the road. It was after. It was every ordinary day since, walking around in a world full of people who do not know, cannot know, would not believe, carrying a thing inside him that does not fit in any conversation he is allowed to have. He said a man can survive almost anything except being the only one who knows it happened. And now, I suppose that is you. I have watched a great deal of footage. I have learned to be careful, and I have learned to be slow to believe. There are 100 ways to fake a shape in the snow, and I have seen most of them. I cannot tell you for certain what was on that road. I was not there. Neither were you. What I can tell you is that the man is real. The 19 winters are real. The fear in his voice when he stops being able to find the words is real. And the file counts the seconds the same way every time you play it, and the seconds do not lie the way memory does. He still has the footage. He still does not drive nights. And somewhere up in that country, on a county road between two towns whose names I am not going to tell you, the next storm is already building out over the cold water, getting ready to come ashore. So I will put the same question to you that I have been sitting with since the night he sent it to me. Was it a tired man and a trick of the snow? Or was it something that has always been out there in the long dark of the north, that learned a long time ago exactly how close it can walk to us, and exactly when to let us go? Real or fake? You decide. If you work nights in country like that, I think you already know which one you believe. And if you have ever seen something on a road that you have never told another living soul, this is me telling you that you are not the only one. In the deep timberlands of Aroostook County, Maine, there was once a logging camp the maps stopped showing in 1992. The company that owned it never explained why the records went missing. The men who worked there never returned to the kind of jobs that put a man in front of cameras. And the children born there were at least 8 of them across 4 decades, vanished into the outside world and never said where they came from. What happened in that camp had a name nobody dared to write down. 6 creatures lived in the deep forest beyond what the loggers called the Second Bend. They stood between 7 and 8 feet tall. Their bodies were covered in dark fur shot through with gray, the kind of gray that comes from age, not bleach. Their hands were 5-fingered, larger than a man's spread palm. Their tracks could be measured at 16 inches, heel to toe. They moved through the brush with the silence of something that had learned silence from generations of being hunted. And they could speak not in words, but in patterns of low knocks and resonant calls that the camp's foreman, a man named Donald, learned to answer. The camp called them family. This week, a 92-year-old man named Marl, who had been the camp's cook from 1954 to 1992, broke a silence he had kept for 70 years. He had weeks to live. He could not, he said, die without telling someone what he had fed at the tree line every night for nearly half a century, and which of the loggers' children carried its blood. The man Marl called that Tuesday in March was named Henry. Henry was 65 years old. He had been born in the camp in 1960, and he had spent the first 14 years of his life there before being sent to a school downstate and into a life that, on the outside, looked entirely ordinary. He had worked timber, he had married, he had raised 2 children. He had never, in 50 years of marriage, told his wife where he came from. Marl had not spoken to Henry in nearly 40 years. The cook's voice on the phone was thin, but it was steady. He told Henry that the doctors had given him weeks. He told Henry he could not take the rule into the ground with him. And he told Henry that of every person who had ever known the camp, Henry was the last one alive who remembered enough to make the truth make sense. Marl made Henry promise 3 things before he would go further. The first promise was that Henry would not name him while he was alive. The second was that Henry would leave the tree line dark, no maps, no coordinates, no descriptions detailed enough to lead anyone back. The third was that Henry would tell the story in a way that let people decide for themselves what was real and what was not. The rule, Marl said, extended outward. You did not prove what you did not have to prove. What follows is the account Henry gave in the weeks after that phone call. Marl died 42 days later. To understand what happened, a person has to understand the country. The North Maine Woods is one of the largest contiguous tracts of working forest in the eastern United States. It runs across Aroostook County into the territory the timber companies have logged, replanted, and relogged for over a century. There are no public roads through most of it. The roads that exist are owned by the companies, locked behind gates, and washed out for half the year. In winter, snowfall reaches 16 feet in the deep stands. The camps that operate there in the cold months are sealed by weather from November to May. Supplies come once a month on company trucks. Mail comes when the truck comes. In between, a camp has what a camp has. The camp where Henry was born had no public name. The company called it Camp 14, then renumbered it twice, then dropped the number from public records entirely after 1981. The men who work there called it simply the camp. It was a closed world by design, and Henry's grandfather Donald had been hired in 1953 specifically because the company believed he was the kind of foreman who could keep a closed world closed. Donald had grown up in that country, his own father had logged it before him, and his grandfather had trapped it before that. He knew the section of forest the company wanted left alone, near what was called the second bend of the river, and he understood, in a way the company executives never put on paper, that something lived there. The hiring conversation, Henry was told later, lasted 10 minutes. Donald accepted the post on the condition that the company would never send a survey crew past the second bend, would never require a head count that asked too many questions, and would never replace him without his recommendation. The company agreed. The arrangement held for almost 40 years. The rule itself was simple and never written down. At the end of every evening meal, the cook would take a covered plate, whatever had been left over, whatever was best, and walk to the edge of the cleared land. There, where the forest began again, he would set it down on a particular stump and walk back, and no one followed. No one looked too carefully, no one counted what came and went. The second part of the rule was that strangers did not pass the second bend, ever. The third part was that families inside the camp protected each other, and that protection extended to every child born there, no matter who the father was. Marl came to the camp in 1954, hired as the cook. He was 40 years old. He was a Quebecois by birth who had crossed the border as a young man and spent 2 decades working the kitchens of company towns from Maine to West Virginia. He had no family of his own. The kitchen became his life. And within 3 years, he had become the keeper of the rule in a way that even Donald deferred to. The reason was simple. The cook was the one who carried the plate. The cook was the bridge between the camp and the tree line. Henry's earliest clear memory is from the winter of 1965. He was 5 years old. The kitchen was warm. The wood stove threw heat into the whole room, and the windows were frosted thick enough that a person could not see out. It was evening. Dinner had been served and eaten. The men were in the bunkhouses or tending to equipment in the warehouse. The kitchen held only Marl, Henry's mother, and Henry. Marl was cleaning the iron pots. Henry's mother was at the table, shelling pine nuts for the next morning's bread. Henry sat in the corner on a low bench, watching the frost on the window glow in the lamplight. Marl took down a plate from the high shelf. It was not one of the regular dinner plates. It was larger, made of tin, scarred from years of use. He ladled stew into it, the good stew, the kind with marrow and root vegetables that had been cooking since morning. He set 2 thick pieces of molasses bread beside it. He covered the plate with a square of waxed cloth. Henry's mother did not look up from her pine nuts. She knew what Marl was doing. But Henry, watching, noticed that her hands went still for a moment. She was listening. Marl put on his heavy coat. The temperature outside was 15 below. He did not call for Henry's mother to stop the boy from watching. He simply walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the snow. Through a small gap in the frost where his breath had melted a circle, Henry watched. Marl walked 20 feet past the cookhouse, to the spot where the cleared land ended and the forest began. There was a tree stump there, snow-covered, scarred by a previous season's marker. Marl set the plate on the stump. He set it down carefully, two-handed. Then he turned and he walked back, and he did not hurry, and he did not look behind him. The moment Marl closed the kitchen door, the air in the room shifted. Henry's mother went back to her pine nuts. Marl went back to his pots. But neither of them was the same person they had been 5 minutes before. They were holding something. They were both listening. Henry asked his mother what Marl had left outside. She told him it was food for the night visitors. She told him the forest was old, and that it had lived in that country longer than people had, and that sometimes it came hungry. She told him the rule was that the camp left food and did not watch what took it, and she told him that the rule was older than any of them. Henry asked if that was why Marl never went back to check the plate in the morning. She said that was exactly why. Henry did not sleep that night. He lay in his bunk in the dark and listened, and sometime around 2 a.m, he heard it. Not a sound exactly, a weight. The snow compressing under something with mass. A long, slow breath that sounded almost like wind through pine, except it came from the direction of the stump, and the wind that night was still. There followed a soft scrape, the sound of something being lifted, the sound of something else being set down, a moment of complete silence, and then the weight moving away. What struck him most lying there in the dark at 5 years old was not fear. It was the impossibility of the silence. Whatever had come to the stump was large enough to compress snow he could hear from inside a sealed bunkhouse. But its movement away made no sound at all. It did not crunch. It did not snap a branch. It simply was, and then was not. In the morning, Henry walked barefoot to the stump. The plate was gone. In its place was a rabbit, skinned clean, the paws arranged neat across its chest. Beside the rabbit lay a small stack of split kindling, 5 pieces, each exactly the same length, the cuts so even they looked machined. Marl came out and found Henry standing there, his feet already going numb in the snow. He did not scold the boy. He picked Henry up and carried him back inside. And as he wrapped the boy's feet, he explained the rule one more time. The camp did not follow. The camp did not look too closely. The camp did not count. But the cook also said this. He said the rabbit was good. He said the kindling was good. He said whatever had left them had been fair about the trade, and that was how a person knew it was not an animal. An animal took what it wanted. A person traded. Henry would remember that image for the rest of his life. The rabbit, the kindling, the idea that something in the forest was keeping a ledger and making sure the accounts came out even. For the next 9 years, Henry would wake before the other children almost every morning, and he would go to the kitchen door and look through the gap in the frost to see what had been left. Some mornings, nothing. Some mornings, a single bird. Once a length of tanned hide, scraped soft, exactly the size to wrap a child's foot for snow. Once, when Henry was 9 and had been ill for a week with a fever the camp's medic could not break, a bundle of bark and dark berries appeared on the stump with no plate set out the night before. Marl boiled the bark and the berries into a bitter tea. Henry's fever broke that afternoon. He never asked how the people in the tree line had known he was sick. He understood by then that they knew. By the time Henry was 8, he understood that the camp lived inside a trade economy. The cook left meals at the tree line. In return, the forest left things, not always meat, sometimes tools. Once, a stack of birch bark, peeled clean and stacked square, that Marl used as fire starter for a year. Once, after one of the loggers caught a saw blade in his thigh and lay in the bunkhouse fevering for 3 days, a specific plant appeared on the kitchen stoop. The camp's part-time medic recognized it. It was a pain remedy that grew only in the deep woods, 3 miles past where any logger went regularly. The plant had been left there with intention. The logger walked again within the week. It was the child, though. that changed how the camp understood what it was living next to. Henry's aunt Eileen gave birth to a daughter in the winter of 1967. The birth happened at the camp because the roads were closed. Marl assisted because Marl was the most steady person in the camp, and because Donald trusted him absolutely. The cook later told Henry very carefully what he had seen that night. He did not tell it in a way that frightened the boy. He told it the way a person tells the truth about something he respects. The baby was too large. She came into the world too easily, as if her small body understood something about passage that human babies did not understand. Her eyes opened immediately and tracked the lamplight. By the next morning, she had a grip in her hand that startled the women who held her. By the end of the week, no one in the camp could pretend she was an ordinary infant. Her name was Sarah. She was Henry's cousin. And the camp simply absorbed what she was, the way a closed community absorbs everything it cannot afford to question. Donald did the thing that confirmed it. When Sarah was old enough to walk, Donald took her alone to the edge of the cleared land at dusk. Marl watched from the kitchen window. Donald knelt down beside the child, and he made a sound, not a word, but a pattern. A series of low knocks against his own chest, followed by a rising hum that seemed to come from deep in his throat. He waited, and from the tree line 20 yards into the dark, something answered. The same pattern returned, then a variation, then a long, low call that traveled through the trees and made Sarah's small body straighten in attention. The child responded, not with her voice, with understanding. She knew what was being said. Donald walked her back to the kitchen, and he sat down across from Marl, and the two men did not speak for a long time. Marl told Henry later that Donald had a look on his face that the cook had never seen on any man before. It was the look of a person who had finally been told what he had always suspected. It was the look of a person who realized he was not in charge of his own life anymore. The language Donald had learned, and which he taught patiently to Marl over the years and partially to Henry in his teens, was not complex by human standards. There were perhaps 30 distinct signals. 2 short knocks meant acknowledgement. 3 meant a question. A long, low call followed by silence meant come closer. A long, high call followed by a short knock meant stay back. The rising hum that Donald used to greet meant respect. The descending hum that the tree line returned meant respect received. A pattern of 4 knocks, repeated twice, meant a death. A pattern of 4 knocks repeated 3 times meant a birth. The camp had heard the death pattern in 1961, 1968, 1974, 1979, and 1986. The birth pattern came less often in 1963, in 1969, in 1977, and in 1981. Donald kept those dates in his head and never wrote them down. He believed, Marl said, that to record the numbers would be to make them ownable, and the people in the tree line did not belong to anyone. The camp understood from the moment Donald and Sarah's first exchange that the thing in the tree line was not a thing. It was a people. It was a small population of a separate kind of person, and Donald had just learned its language well enough to know that it had been waiting for the camp to learn. After that, the trades deepened. They became less about food and more about cooperation. In the brutal winter of 1970, when the supply truck got buried in a slide and the camp ran low on cordwood and flour, the tree line provided. Not piecemeal. A steady supply of split logs began appearing at the cleared edge, more than enough to heat the bunkhouses through February. Dressed meat appeared on the stump. Once, a sack of dried berries, the kind that grew only in the high alpine meadows 2 days' walk away. The camp would have starved or frozen without it. In return, the camp held the rule with absolute discipline. New loggers who asked questions were told to look for work elsewhere. Company surveyors who wandered too far were turned back by terrain that suddenly seemed worse than it was. And the half-blood child grew up among them, called cousin, treated as family, watched over by everyone. The years inside the camp settled into a rhythm. Spring brought the crew change. New men arrived, the long-timers stayed. The rule was explained quietly to those who needed to know. Summer brought the heavy work, the chainsaws, the noise. The tree line kept its distance during those months. Fall brought the trades back. Winter brought the closure. The roads were impassable. The camp was sealed. And the rule became something close to a meditation. In 1972, the rule was tested for the first time in Henry's memory. A logger named Corey decided the whole thing was superstition. He was on his 3rd season at the camp. He had not seen anything. He concluded that the night visitors were a story the old men told to keep newcomers in line. One evening, Corey followed Marl to the tree line at a distance. He hid in the brush. He waited to see what came. The camp never spoke of what happened next. Corey returned to the bunkhouse 3 hours later, soaked through, his face the color of dough. He packed his things and refused to speak. When the roads cleared, he was on the first truck out, and he never came back to that country. Decades later, at a logger's funeral in Bangor, Corey approached Marl and said one sentence, and one sentence only. He said he had seen what happened, and he understood now why the rule was law. Then he walked away and never spoke to anyone from the camp again. After Corey, the rule was never questioned. In 1974, Sarah, who was 7 years old, fell from a ladder in the warehouse. The fall was 20 feet onto a packed dirt floor. The adults who saw it thought she was dead before she landed. She lay still for less than a minute. Then she got up. Her left arm was clearly broken, the bone visibly out of line beneath the skin. Marl set the arm with what he had. Within a week, Sarah was using the arm. Within 2 weeks, the break had healed in a way that did not match how human bones healed. The camp drew the obvious conclusion. The bloodline was stronger. Whatever ran in Sarah's veins ran true. By that point, there were 3 half-blood children growing up inside the camp. Sarah, born 1967, a boy named David, born 1969, to a logger's wife who had lived briefly in the camp before her husband transferred out. She stayed, the husband never knew, and the camp absorbed her. And a girl named Eleanor, born 1971, to one of the kitchen women whose own mother had been a camp child a generation earlier. The pattern, when Henry pieced it together years later, was clear. The bloodline did not spread through violence. It spread through choice. Certain women in the camp formed quiet, decade-long bonds with the people of the tree line. The bonds were not advertised. The children were claimed by the women's human husbands or by no one in particular. The camp absorbed them, raised them, taught them the rule from the inside. Henry would think about those choices for the rest of his life. He could not remember when he first understood that not all the camp's marriages were ordinary. It came to him gradually through what was not said. His Aunt Eileen never spoke of Sarah's father. His mother once described, in a tone that Henry only later recognized as careful, a winter walk she had taken alone in 1959, the year before Henry was born, and how she had stopped at a clearing she could not later find again. She said only that she had felt understood there for the first time in her life. She did not say by whom. Henry did not ask. The kitchen women, and there were 3 or 4 of them across the camp's lifetime, were not strangers to each other or to what they had done. They formed a quiet kind of sisterhood. They did each other's hair on long winter evenings. They taught each other songs in low voices that the men did not hear. And when one of them was carrying, there was always, in the year a half-blood child was on its way, a particular stillness in the kitchen. The others closed around her with a protectiveness that Henry, watching from the floor as a boy, had assumed was simply how women were with each other. Only as an adult did he understand it had been something larger than friendship. The fathers were not unknown to the camp. Donald knew them, Marl knew them, the mothers knew them, the children knew them in some way they could not name. But the camp did not speak of them aloud, and the people of the tree line did not come to the cleared land to claim them. The choice the women had made was respected on both sides. The children belonged to the camp. The covenant did not break, even in love. By 1976, there were 5 half-blood children. Henry played with them daily. They were faster than he was, stronger, more careful. They understood, in a way that he could feel but not name, that they were responsible for hiding what they were. They never showed strength around outsiders. They were not allowed near the supply trucks when the drivers stayed for coffee. They were drilled gently by Donald and by Marl and by their mothers in the language of passing. The drills were almost a game. Sarah would be told to lift a stove iron that no 9-year-old should have been able to lift, and she would lift it easily, and then Marl would tell her to set it down and try again as if it were heavy. She would learn the precise face a struggling child makes. She would learn the small grunts. She would learn to pause before a doorway as if uncertain, when she could in fact see in the dark better than most adults. David would be told to run a foot race against Henry and to lose by exactly half a step. He would lose by exactly half a step every time, and only Henry, who knew him, could see that David was holding back. Eleanor learned to cry in a way that made her seem ordinary, even though she had a constitution that did not allow her to bruise. The half-blood children loved this game when they were small and resented it when they grew. Marl knew the resentment was coming, and he prepared each of them in turn for it. He would sit them down in the kitchen, usually in the long afternoons of winter, when the men were out and the kitchen was empty, and he would tell them that the game was a kindness, that what they were was a gift the world would steal from them if they let it show, that the rule which the camp held for the people in the tree line was the same rule they would hold for themselves. Do not be seen, do not let the world know, trade fair, trust the camp. Sarah, more than the others, accepted this early. She was a watchful child. She listened to the men talk. She understood by the time she was 8 that the world outside the camp was a different country than the one she lived in, and that her safety depended on never letting that country see her as she was. David fought it longer. He was a boy, and he wanted to win. By the time he was 12, he had mostly settled. Eleanor never seemed to mind. She had a stillness in her that the others did not. Henry suspected, looking back, that Eleanor heard things from the tree line the others did not hear, and that she lived in a kind of dual citizenship that the rest of them could only approximate. In 1976, Eleanor walked alone to the edge of the cleared land in the middle of a summer night. Henry, then 16 and a light sleeper, saw her go. He did not follow. The rule held even then. But he sat by his bunkhouse window and watched. Eleanor stood at the stump for almost an hour. She did not move. From the tree line, no shape appeared. But Henry believed, watching, that the two of them were speaking. Not with the knocks and calls, with something older and quieter. When she came back, she was crying. He never asked what about. She never told him. But the next morning, on the kitchen stoop, was a small woven thing, a bracelet of grass and dyed sinew sized to fit a 5-year-old's wrist. Eleanor wore it for the rest of her childhood. In 1977, a company surveyor named Jim Beckland came to the camp to update the timber rotation maps. Beckland was a professional. He noticed within a day that the section near the second bend did not match the harvest projections. He asked Donald to walk the boundary with him. He wanted to understand why an entire section of prime timber was being left untouched. Donald invited Becklin into the office. Marl brought coffee, the strong kind. The two men sat together for 3 hours. What was said in that room, Henry never learned, but Becklin left the camp with a clear understanding that his company had no interest in that section of forest, that the timber was not worth the access cost, and that the report he would file would describe the land as inaccessible and marginal. Becklin filed exactly that report. The company believed it because the report was half true and because the company trusted its foreman. The section near the second bend remained closed. That fall, the camp lost one of its own. A logger named Pete had been working a chain when a half-cut tree shifted on him. His leg was crushed below the knee. The roads were closed. The nearest doctor was 60 miles out by snowshoe. Pete would have died of infection within 2 days. Marl set what bone he could. Donald did what he could with poultices the camp medic had stockpiled. By the second night, Pete's leg was black and the fever was climbing. On the third morning, there was a plant on the kitchen stoop. Not the same one as before, a different plant, bitter, dark green with a root that smelled of iron. Marl boiled it and held the cup to Pete's mouth. By that evening, the fever had broken. By the end of the week, the wound was clean. Pete kept the leg. He limped for the rest of his life, but he walked. The camp left a triple ration on the stump that night. The triple ration was taken, and the next morning, on the cleared land, the camp found a single mark in the snow, a long, curving line, drawn by something dragging a fingertip. It was, Donald said, a thank you. The first one the camp had ever received in that form. He stood looking at it for a long time before the wind erased it. By 1978, the camp's secret had spread into the second generation. Sarah was 11, David was 9, Eleanor was 7. 2 younger half-blood children had been born in the kitchen. The camp's child population was 8, and 5 of them were not entirely human, and not one outsider had any idea. In 1979, Sarah turned 12, and the conversation began about sending her into the outside world. She was too obviously gifted to stay hidden in a camp forever. Donald and her mother and Marl decided together that she would go to a Catholic boarding school in Massachusetts, run by an order that took in difficult cases where her differences could be explained as the result of a hard rural childhood. Sarah went. She did not return to the camp again until she was 18, and only then for a single weekend. The departure was harder on the camp than on the child. Sarah's mother did not weep in front of the others, but Marl, who tended the kitchen alone the night Sarah's truck pulled out, told Henry many years later that he had wept while he washed the supper plates. He had been the one to deliver her. He had been the one to set her broken arm. He had taught her more than anyone the precise small grunts of a struggling child. He had given her the tools to survive among ordinary humans, and he understood that giving her those tools was the same as sending her away forever. She would learn to pass. She would pass so well that she would become someone else. The tree line knew she was leaving. The night before her truck came, a small bundle appeared on the stump, a square of woven cedar bark wrapped around something. Marl unwrapped it in the kitchen. Inside was a single carved stone, smooth as a river stone, but cut into a shape that suggested a stylized hand. Sarah took it with her to school and kept it on her bedside table for the next 40 years. Marl told Henry that he believed her father had carved it for her, and that the carving had taken months. Marl kept a ledger in his head. He knew how many people live beyond the tree line. The The count, by 1980, was 6 adults and 4 young. He knew their patterns, their seasons, their preferences. He knew when the females were carrying, there was a shift in what was taken from the stump, a specific hunger for certain foods that returned after a birth. He knew when one of them was injured because the trades would change, would ask for different things. He knew when one of them died because for a season, the count was off, and the camp would leave extra, and the extra would not be taken. He was the bridge, the language carrier. And the half-blood children, before any of them left the camp, were each brought to him in turn. Marl would sit them down in the kitchen, and he would tell them the rule in a way that they would carry forever, not as a prohibition, as a covenant. By 1982, David had been sent to apprentice with a logger in Vermont, who owed Donald a favor and would ask no questions. Eleanor went to live with a relative downstate in 1984. The 2 younger children followed in 1986 and 1987. By the time Henry himself left the camp in 1974 at 14, the rule had been internalized in him so deeply that he never spoke of any of it, not to his wife, not to his children, not to anyone, for 50 years. In 1981, the rule almost broke. A state agricultural inspector named Russell Mateo arrived unannounced with a clipboard and a set of questions about supply order discrepancies. The company's manifests for the camp, going back to 1969, showed monthly food orders that exceeded the documented headcount by roughly 30%. Mateo was not investigating anything sinister, he was doing his job. But his job was to ask questions, and his questions were specific. Why did the supply orders for flour and dried protein exceed the headcount by that margin every single month, in every season for over a decade? Why did the manifest show personnel rotating in and out on regular schedules while the orders stayed constant? Where were these extra rations going? Donald told Mateo that the company's accounting was imprecise. He said spoilage was high in the deep woods. He said the orders included contingency reserves. He said that some of the personnel records were inaccurate due to the rapid turnover. Mateo wrote it all down. He did not believe any of it. He said he would file his report. What happened next, Henry did not learn until decades later. Marl told him on the second-to-last phone call. Donald made a phone call to a regional company executive that night. The executive made a phone call to someone in the state capital. Within 2 weeks, Russell Mateo had been reassigned to a coastal district. His report on the camp was placed in a file that was never reviewed. His career continued, but it never advanced. He died in 2006, having never spoken publicly about the camp. The rule had held, but the camp had seen what the breaking of it would have cost. A few months later, a second threat arrived in the form of a graduate student named Maria Lynn. Lynn was a researcher in old-growth forest ecosystems at the University of Maine. She had read in an obscure academic paper that a section of forest near the second bend of the river had been undisturbed for over a century, and she wanted access to study it. She wrote to the company. The company referred her to Donald. Donald said no. Lynn came anyway. She camped illegally on the riverbank, 3 miles upstream of the camp. She spent 2 days collecting samples and making detailed notes. On the 3rd day, she walked back to her campsite and found it scattered. Her tent had been torn open from the top. Her sample containers had been opened, and the contents tipped onto the ground in a deliberate pattern. Her notebooks lay open in the dirt, pages torn, and pressed into the mud beside her cold fire was a single handprint. 5 fingers. The palm of the hand was 9 inches across. The fingers were 11 inches long. Lynn walked out of the forest the next morning. She drove directly to the county sheriff's office in Houlton and reported that she had been attacked in the woods by something intelligent. She showed them her photographs. The sheriff's office took her statement. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted. The official report classified the incident as bear damage. The handprint photographs were described as inconclusive, possibly mud disturbance, possibly a hoax. Lynn's research was dismissed as compromised. She never published the work. She moved out of state within a year. She never returned to the North Maine woods. In 1983, a deer hunter from Quebec crossed the border illegally and worked his way south along the river. He was tracking a wounded buck. He passed the second bend in the late afternoon and made camp for the night under a stand of pines 2 miles further on, well inside what the camp considered closed land. He never reached his camp. He emerged from the forest at dawn 3 days later on the wrong side of the river with no rifle, no pack, and a confused account of having gotten turned around in the dark. Border Patrol found him wandering. He told them he had heard sounds in the woods that he could not explain. He told them he had walked for a full day in a direction he believed was south, only to find himself further north than he had started. He said he had set down his rifle to climb a slope, and when he turned back to retrieve it, the rifle had been moved 20 yards uphill. He had walked away. He had not run. Running, he said, had felt like the wrong thing to do. The camp learned of the hunter through a logger who had a cousin in Border Patrol. Donald listened to the story and said only one thing. He said the people in the tree line had been gentle. Henry, hearing the account as a young adult, understood that gentleness was a choice the people in the tree line made every time a stranger crossed into their land. They could have done otherwise. They had chosen not to. The camp understood then that the rule did not protect itself alone. The people in the tree line protected it too. They knew when the boundary had been crossed. They knew how to push an intruder out without injury, and they trusted the camp to handle the aftermath. It was, at that moment, the most cooperative relationship between two intelligent species that Henry believes has ever existed on the continent. It was also, he understands now, the most fragile. The camp began to wind down in 1985. The timber was thinning. The company was consolidating. The haul roads were being abandoned to the forest. Donald was aging, he was 70 by then, and the company was not replacing him with anyone who understood what he had quietly carried for 32 years. By 1988, the camp ran only seasonally with a skeleton crew. By 1992, it shut down for good. The bunkhouses were boarded, the cookhouse was emptied. The haul road was gated, and the gate was rusted shut within 5 years. Donald died in 1990. He had a stroke on a Sunday morning in his own bed, with Marl sitting beside him. Marl told Henry on the long phone call before he died that Donald's last act was to raise his right hand and tap his chest twice. 2 short knocks. Acknowledgement. The camp's old foreman had used the language one final time to a room he believed was empty except for the cook. Whether the people in the tree line heard it, Marl did not know. But that evening, on the stump that had not been used in over a year, someone had left a small green branch. Marl took it inside and pressed it between the pages of a book he kept under his pillow for the rest of his life. The transfer of the rule had to happen quickly after Donald's death. There was a retired logger named Tom Pelletier who lived in the nearest town. Pelletier had worked the camp for 15 years. He understood the rule absolutely. After the camp closed, Pelletier drove the old haul road twice a month, in every season the road allowed, and he left supplies at the original stump, sometimes flour, sometimes dried meat, sometimes split firewood. The covenant did not break. Pelletier did this from 1992 until his death in 2009. He was 78 when he died. He left no instructions for a successor because he did not believe anyone left would honor them. He went alone on those drives. He did not speak of them to his wife. The truck he used was his own. He paid for the supplies out of his pension. For 17 years, he carried the rule by himself, and no one knew. After Pelletier, there was silence. Henry did not know what happened to the people in the tree line after 2009. He has wondered for 15 years whether they starved or moved deeper into Canada, or simply continued their old life in a forest that no longer had a camp at its edge. He does not know. The rule, he says, prevented him from finding out. The bloodline, however, did not disappear. Sarah graduated from Boston College and became a corporate attorney in New York. She married a human man. They have 3 children. Her husband, Marl, told Henry on the last call, does not know what his wife is. Sarah has never told him. The children, by all appearances, are entirely human, but Marl noted that 2 of them have a hand size and a quiet strength that suggests the trait may surface again in their generation. David apprenticed as a carpenter and now runs a custom furniture business in Vermont. He is married to a woman he met in college. They have 1 daughter. The daughter, age 16 at the time of Marl's last accounting, is unusually gifted at music, particularly at perceiving frequencies that other humans cannot hear. Eleanor moved to Oregon in 1995 and has not been heard from since. Marl believed she had found others of her kind. He had no proof. The 2 younger half-blood children grew up, married, and live ordinary lives in New England. Marl kept track of them as long as he could. He said the bloodline now has 9 grandchildren and at least 3 great-grandchildren scattered across 4 states. In 2023, a podcast researcher named Ellen Vance began pulling old company records from the Maine Timber Archive. The records had been donated to the University of Maine Library in 2014 when the company was acquired by a larger holding firm. Vance was investigating supply chain anomalies in 20th century logging operations. She found the supply discrepancies at Camp 14. She began contacting retired loggers. By the autumn of 2024, she'd spoken to 7 men who had worked the camp. 5 of them had refused to speak further. 2 had given her vague answers about a man named Donald and a section of forest that was off limits. Vance was assembling a theory. She had not yet found Marl. She had not yet found Henry. Marl learned of her research from a man in Houlton who had been contacted twice. He realized, lying in the bed where he would die, that Vance would eventually find what she was looking for. And he could not bear, he told Henry on the phone, the thought of the camp story being told by someone who would treat it as a mystery instead of a covenant. That is why he made the call. That is why he asked Henry to speak. The truth, as Henry understands it now, is plain and impossible and real. For 45 years, a logging camp in northern Maine sheltered a small population of a separate kind of person. The camp fed them, the camp protected them, the camp absorbed their bloodline into its own families. And in return, the people of the tree line protected the camp from a world that would have destroyed both of them. The horror of the story, Henry says, was never the creature in the woods. The horror was what would have happened if the world had ever learned what was there. The half-blood children would have been taken. The mothers would have been prosecuted or institutionalized, or worse. The people in the tree line would have been hunted, captured, studied, displayed. The covenant, which was respect and trade, and the quiet recognition of another kind of person, would have become spectacle. The camp made a choice. The choice was that some truths are not the world's to own. Some truths belong to the people who carry them and to the people who trust them with their lives. Some who hear this account will conclude that the camp was complicit in something darker, that what lived in the tree line was not a person at all, but something dangerous that the camp enabled, that the rule was not respect but cover-up. Henry does not argue with that interpretation. Real or fake, he says, let people decide. That was always the rule, but Henry will say this much: the rabbit was always cleaned with care, The kindling was always split fair. The people in the tree line never took more than was offered. They mourned their dead, they cared for their young, they learned a language they could share with the camp's foreman because they wanted to be known. None of the men who ever saw them, really saw them, looked into their eyes, came back describing a monster. They came back describing something that understood. The bloodline is alive, not hidden anymore because hiding is only possible in small camps in sealed forests, but quiet. The children of those children are now grown, and they live as human as they can, and most of them do not know what they carry. Henry wonders sometimes if any of them have felt it. If Sarah, the lawyer in New York, has stood at the edge of Central Park at dusk and felt something pulling at her from a forest that does not exist there. If David has heard in the silence of his workshop a rhythm of low knocks that he does not consciously recognize. If Eleanor in Oregon has found her way to others who carry the same blood. He does not know, he cannot ask. The rule extends outward even now. The last thing Marl told him on that final call was this. The cook said that kindness was not always visible. He said that respect looked like a plate of food left on a stump and a promise never to look behind. He said the most human thing a person could do was to protect something they did not fully understand and to trust that the trade would be fair. The cook said the people of the tree line had kept that trust for 45 years. He asked Henry to tell people that, to tell them that somewhere in the North Maine woods, in the old forest that has been swallowing the camp for 32 years, there is a kind of person who was treated with kindness and who repaid it in kind, who left rabbits cleaned and kindling split, who delivered babies, who buried their dead, who learned to speak with a man named Donald because Donald learned to speak with them first. The rest, Marl said, was up to the people who heard the story, real or fake. Decide for yourselves. The camp is gone. The bunkhouses have collapsed. The road is overgrown. The stump where the cook left the plate is somewhere under 32 years of leaf fall and snow rot, and no one alive knows exactly where it stood, but the tree line is still there, and the bloodline is still there. And the rule, in whatever form it now takes in the lives of grandchildren who do not know what they are, is still there too. That is what Marl could not take to the grave. That is what Henry has told. What anyone does with it now, Henry says, is no longer the camp's concern. The rule still holds. He does not follow, he does not count. And the tree line, after all these years, is still the only place he has ever truly considered home. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. My son was gone for 9 hours in a blizzard, and I had already begun to understand, in the part of me that does the math a mother never wants to do, that I was not going to get him back alive. He was 5 years old. The temperature that night dropped to 11 below zero before the wind chill, and the wind chill took it somewhere I do not have a number for. A grown man dressed for it would have been in trouble. A 5-year-old in a flannel shirt and one boot had no business surviving the first hour, let alone the night. But at dawn, something carried him out of the timber and set him down at the edge of our property, alive and warm. And then it stood at the tree line and would not come any closer and would not leave. I have never told this story to anyone outside my own family. I am telling it now because I am old and because of what happened on our land 3 weeks ago, and because the thing that brought my son home that morning kept a promise to this family for 35 years, and somebody other than me should know that it existed before there's no one left who remembers. I'm going to tell you all of it in order the way it happened. I'm not going to dress it up, and I'm not going to leave parts out to make it easier to believe. You can decide for yourself what it was. I stopped needing to decide a long time ago. His name was Caleb. The winter this happened was the winter of 1989 in the mountains of western Montana, and the thing that carried him home has been the largest fact of my life ever since. Larger than my marriage, larger than my faith, larger than anything I have ever been able to say out loud until today. I need to tell you who we were first, because the kind of people you think we are will change how you hear everything that comes after. We were not dreamers. We were not the kind of people who went looking for mysteries in the woods, or who wanted there to be something out past the porch light. My husband Daniel was a logger, and then a sawyer, and then, when his back gave out, a small engine mechanic who could fix anything with a motor, and a great many things without one. I kept the books for 2 of the local outfits, and raised our children, and ran a garden that fed us most of the year. We were Lutheran, we were tired. We were practical in the specific way that rural people are practical. When the nearest hospital is 50 minutes away on a good road, and there are no good roads in February. We lived in the Cabinet Mountains in the northwest corner of the state, up a county road that turned to gravel and then to dirt and then to our driveway, which was the last thing the plow reached and the first thing it gave up on. Our nearest neighbor was 4 miles down the mountain. The nearest town worth the name was Libby, and Libby was a long way from anywhere. The land around us was the kind of country that does not care whether you live or die. I mean that as a description, not a complaint. The cabinets are steep and wet and densely timbered, western red cedar and hemlock and Douglas fir grown so thick on the north slopes that you can stand at noon in a green twilight. Creeks come off every ridge. The snow comes early and stays late, and falls in amounts that people who have not lived in it do not believe. We were 8 miles from the Cabinet Mountains wilderness boundary, which meant that behind our house there was no road, no cabin, no power line, nothing made by people for a very long way. We had 3 children. Our oldest, Ruth, was 9 that winter. The baby, Sarah, was 2. And Caleb was 5, our middle child, the one who was different from the day he was born. I want to be careful about how I describe Caleb because it matters later. He was not slow, and he was not strange in any way a doctor could name. He was quiet. He watched things. He would sit at the window for an hour looking at the tree line the way other children watch television. And when you asked him what he was looking at, he would say, "The woods," as though that were a complete answer. And for him it was. He did not have much use for words. He had a great deal of use for the outdoors. And we lived in a place where a child could not be kept indoors even if you wanted to keep him there, which we did not, because that was not how children were raised where we lived. We were not careless parents. I have spent 35 years preparing to defend that sentence, so let me just say it plainly. We knew that country, we knew its dangers, we had rules, and our children kept them. Because in that country, a child who does not keep the rules does not get a second mistake. And still, on the 8th of February, 1989, our son walked out of our house and into a blizzard, and we did not know he was gone until it was very nearly too late. The storm had been forecast, but the forecasts in those mountains were a kind of folklore. What came in that afternoon was worse than anything anyone had said. It came in fast, the way the bad ones do, the temperature falling off a cliff and the wind arriving before the snow. And then the snow arriving all at once, not falling so much as being thrown sideways through the air in a white that erased the barn at 60 feet. Daniel was not home. He had driven down to Libby that morning for a part, and the storm had closed the road behind him, and he was stuck in town and would be stuck there for 2 days, and he did not yet know that anything was wrong and would not know until it was over. So it was just me and the 3 children. And I was doing what you do in a storm like that, which is to bring everything in and batten everything down and keep the stove fed and the children close. And somewhere in the middle of all that work, in the small accumulation of ordinary tasks that fills the hour when a storm is coming on, I lost track of where Caleb was. I want to walk you through that hour honestly, because I have walked through it 10,000 times myself. Ruth was helping me with the baby. The dog was barking at the storm. I had gone down to the cellar twice for jars and once for the spare lantern. I had been out to the woodpile on the lee side of the house 3 times, and each time the door had opened onto that wall of white and wind, and each time I had pulled it shut hard behind me. The house was loud with weather. The children had been told to stay in the main room by the stove, and Ruth had been told to watch her brother, and Ruth was 9 and was watching the baby because the baby was the one who could not be left. And Caleb was 5 and was supposed to be old enough not to need watching, and that is the gap. That is the exact size of the gap a child fits through, 5 years old enough to be trusted for the length of a trip to the cellar. Not old enough to understand that the woods he loved had, that afternoon, become a thing that would kill him in an hour. When I came up from the cellar the 3rd time and counted heads the way a mother counts heads without thinking about it, the count was wrong. I want to tell you that I knew immediately. I did not. For a few minutes, I looked in the places a child is: the loft, behind the chair, under the table where Sarah liked to hide. I called his name in the ordinary voice first, the come out now voice, and then in the sharper voice, and then I went to the door and saw that the bottom bolt, the one the children could not reach, was thrown back, and that the snow had drifted in across the threshold in a fan shape that meant the door had been opened, and stood open and then been pulled shut, and I understood that my son was outside. The clock on the wall said 4:40 in the afternoon. It would be full dark by 5:30. The thermometer on the porch, the last time I had looked at it, had read 4 degrees and falling. I did everything right. I need you to hear that, because it did not matter that I did everything right, and a person can do everything right in that country and still lose. I bundled the baby and put both girls in the truck and tried the truck, and the truck would not turn over in that cold, and the phone line was down, which it always was in a storm, and the nearest neighbor was 4 miles down a road that no longer existed under the snow. I had no way to call for help. I had no way to drive for help. I had a 2-year-old and a 9-year-old who could not be left, and a 5-year-old somewhere out in the dark and the wind. And I had a choice to make that no one should ever have to make, which was whether to leave my daughters alone in a freezing house to search for my son, or to keep my daughters safe and not search. I made a 3rd choice, which was the only one I could live with. I put the girls back inside by the stove. I told Ruth to keep the fire fed and the door bolted and not to open it for anyone but me. I took the big lantern and Daniel's wool coat, and I went out into the storm, calling my son's name in a voice that the wind took out of my mouth and tore into nothing before it had traveled 10 feet. I searched until I could not feel my hands. I searched the yard and the near edge of the timber and the path to the creek that he liked, and I found nothing, no track, because the snow filled a track in under a minute, no sound, because the storm ate sound, no sign of him at all. The dark came down, the cold became a living thing with intent. And at some point, I do not know when, I understood that if I stayed out, I would die too, and that my daughters would then be alone. And I went back inside, and I've never in my life done anything harder than walking back through that door without my son. I sat up all night with the lantern in the window. I do not have words for that night. I prayed, and then I bargained, and then I stopped doing either and just sat, looking out at the white nothing where my boy was, keeping the only light I could keep. As though a light in a window could reach him, as though anything could reach him out there. The wind screamed against the house until past midnight, and then it began to fall off. and by 4 in the morning the snow had stopped and the sky cleared the way it does after the worst storms, hard and black and full of more stars than seems possible. And the cold deepened the way it always deepens when the clouds let go. And I sat in that terrible clear cold and waited for a morning I did not want to come, because morning would make it real. And then, just before dawn, the dog, who had been silent and shivering by the stove all night, stood up and walked to the door and did not bark. He stood at the door with his ears up and his hackles down, and made a low sound in his chest that I had never heard him make before, and have never heard since, a sound that was not fear. I went to the window. The light before dawn in deep winter is a blue that has no warmth in it, a color that comes up out of the snow itself before the sun has any part in it. In that blue light I could see the yard and the fence and the black wall of the timber beyond the fence, and standing just inside the timber at the place where the trees began, there was a shape that was not a tree. It was tall. That was the first thing before my mind would give me anything else. It was tall in a way that did not fit the world, taller than a man, taller than the door of the barn, and it was broad across the shoulders in a way that made the height make sense, and it was standing upright and still, and it was holding something against its chest the way you hold something you are protecting. I could not move. I want to be honest about that. I had been awake for 24 hours, and I had lost my son, and I was looking at something my mind had no shelf to put on, and for a long moment I simply stood at the glass and did not breathe. And then the shape leaned forward, slow, and lowered the thing it was carrying down onto the snow inside the fence, set it down the way you set down something that must not be jarred, with a care that I could see even from the house, even in that light. And then it straightened back up to its full, impossible height and took one step backward into the timber and stopped. And the thing it had set down in the snow moved. It sat up. It was small, and it was wearing a flannel shirt, and it had one boot, and it turned its head and looked at the house. I do not remember opening the door. I remember the snow to my knees and the cold like a wall, and the lantern still in my hand for no reason. And I remember reaching my son and going down onto my knees in the snow and pulling him into me, and he was warm. That is a thing I cannot explain and have never been able to explain and have stopped trying to explain. He had been outside for 13 hours in temperatures that kill, and he was warm under the flannel, warm at the chest and the belly, his hands and his one bare foot cold but not frozen. Not white, not the way they should have been, the way they had no right not to be. He looked up at me, and he was not afraid, and he was not crying, and he said the thing that I have carried in my chest for 35 years. He said the tall man kept me warm. I held my son in the snow, and I looked up over his head at the tree line. It was still there. The shape, standing just inside the trees in the blue light, watching us. Not coming closer, not leaving. I could see it more clearly now, though clearly is not quite the word, because there was something about it that the eye could not fully hold, the way you cannot quite hold the details of a face in a dream. It was covered in hair, dark, frosted white at the shoulders, and the crown where the cold had settled on it. Its arms were long, its head sat forward on the great shoulders, and its eyes, which caught the first light and held it, were looking at my son. I did the only thing that made sense, which was the wrong thing and the right thing at the same time. I gathered Caleb up and I backed toward the house, watching it, not turning my back on it, and it watched me go, and it did not move. And when I reached the door and pushed the girls back from it and got my son inside, and turned to look one more time before I shut out the cold. It was still standing exactly where it had stood, at the edge of the trees, at the line where the timber began, and it had not crossed the fence, and it had not crossed even the open ground. and I understood, without knowing how I understood it, that it would not. It had brought him to the edge of our world, and it would come no farther. The sun came up. I built the fire high and stripped Caleb out of the wet flannel and wrapped him in every blanket in the house and held him and checked him over. The way you check a child, every finger, every toe, the ears, the nose, the places the cold takes first. And there was nothing. No frostbite, no frost nip. A child who had spent a winter night in the open with no coat and no fire should have been, at best, terribly injured. He should not have been alive at all. He was unharmed. He was hungry. He ate 2 bowls of oatmeal and fell asleep in my arms by the stove and slept the clean, deep sleep of a healthy child. And I sat and held him and shook finally, now that it was over, the way you shake when the thing has passed. And through the window, through the morning, the shape stayed at the tree line. It did not stay the whole day. By full light, it had stepped back among the trees so that I could no longer be certain I was seeing it and not seeing the trunks and the shadows between them. But every time I went to the window for the first hours, there was a sense out there, a weight, the specific feeling you get when something is watching, and the dog felt it too, and the dog was not afraid. The dog who barked at elk and at the mail truck and at his own reflection went to the window and looked out at the tree line and wagged once, slow, and then lay back down by the boy. When Daniel made it home 2 days later, when the plow finally broke the road, I told him everything. I had thought, in the time I had alone with it, about whether to tell him, and I had decided that a marriage that could not hold, this could not hold anything, and I told him all of it, standing in the kitchen while the children slept. And I watched my practical husband, my logger, my fixer of engines, listen to a story that had no place in the world he believed in. He did not say I was tired and had imagined it. I will love him forever for that. He listened to the whole thing, and he was quiet for a long time, and then he went and stood at the window where I had stood and looked at the tree line, and then he went to Caleb's bed and looked at his sleeping son, who should have been dead, and he came back and he said, "All right, just that." All right, which meant, I believe you, and it meant, we will carry this together, and it meant, what do we do now? And we did not know the answer to that last one, and it would take us years to learn it. What we knew was that something out there had found our son in a blizzard, in country where a grown man would have died, and had not eaten him, and had not kept him, and had not harmed one hair on him, but had kept him warm through the killing cold of a Montana night, and had carried him home at first light, and laid him down inside our fence with the care of a parent, and had then stood at the edge of our land and refused to come closer, as though it knew exactly where the line was between its world and ours, and respected it. That is not what an animal does. I had lived my whole life among animals. I knew what animals did. This was not that. It came back in the spring. I should say it had probably never gone. But in the spring, we began to find the signs, and the signs began the long conversation that lasted the rest of our lives. The first thing was a fish. In April, when the creek came up with the melt, we found a fish on the flat-top boulder that sat at the edge of the timber where our land met the trees, the same place, almost exactly, where it had set Caleb down. A whole cutthroat trout, fresh, laid out on the rock. We thought the first time that an osprey had dropped it. Then it happened again. And then we understood that it was being left, and where it was being left, and we understood slowly what it meant. It was the place. The boulder at the tree line. The line it would not cross. That was the place where things were left. And it became, over the years, the place where things were exchanged, because we began to leave things too. I want to tell you how that started, because it was Caleb who started it, and because it tells you something about what this was. Caleb was not afraid. He had not been afraid that morning, and he was not afraid after. To him, the tall man was simply a fact of the world, the way the creek was a fact and the mountains were a fact. He talked about it the way a child talks, without the weight that adults put on things. He would say the tall man is at the trees, and he was usually right. He could feel it before the rest of us could. And one day that first spring, Caleb took half of his own sandwich out to the boulder and left it there because, he said, the tall man shares with us, so we share with the tall man, and that was the whole of his theology, and it was better than mine. The sandwich was gone the next morning. In its place, on the rock, was a small pile of huckleberries, out of season, which should not have been possible in April, which meant they had been gathered the summer before and kept somewhere, and which meant that whatever left them understood the idea of a gift, the idea of giving back, the idea of exchange. That was when I stopped thinking of it as an it. We never had a word for it that felt right. Daniel called it the old man of the woods, which his own grandfather had called something in a language Daniel did not speak, an old word from the old country that meant the one who watches. Caleb just called it the tall man his whole life. I came privately to think of it the way you think of a difficult and beloved relative who lives just out of reach, present at the edges of everything, never quite in the room. We learned its rules because it had rules, and the rules never changed in 35 years. It would not cross the tree line, not the fence, not the open ground, not ever. In all those years, it never set foot on the cleared land around our house. The boulder marked the boundary, and the boundary was absolute, and I came to understand it not as a limitation but as a courtesy, the way a man takes off his hat in another man's house. This was our place. The timber was its place. The rock was where the two places touched, and at the rock things could pass between. It came most in winter. I think now that the winters were hard for it, harder than the summers when the country was full of food, and that the things we left at the rock in the cold months mattered to it in a way they did not in the summer. We left what we could, smoked fish, bread. In the worst winters, when we had little, we left what little we had, and I never once regretted it, because of the boy asleep and warm by the stove who should have been dead in the snow, and it watched over us. That is the part that is hardest to make a stranger believe, and it is the part I am most certain of. It watched over this family for 35 years, and twice that I know of, it did more than watch. The second time it saved one of my children was in the summer of 1994, and Caleb was 10, and it was not a blizzard this time, but water. The creek behind our house was small most of the year, but in June, with the high country still melting, it ran hard and cold and deep in the narrow places, and the children knew to stay out of it in June, and Caleb, who kept every rule, kept that one too, except that on the day in question, he had gone up along the bank further than he should have. Following something, a frog, a fish, the way a boy follows things, and the bank, undercut by the high water, gave way beneath him. I was not there. I have only what Ruth told me, because Ruth was there. Ruth, who was 14 that summer and had gone up the creek with her brother, and what Ruth told me, she told me the same way every time for the rest of her life, without changing it, which is how I know it is true, because the made-up stories change and the true ones do not. Ruth said Caleb went into the water and the water took him fast, the way that creek took everything in June, down toward the narrows where the creek dropped between two boulders into a deep, cold churn that would have held him under. Ruth said she ran along the bank, screaming and could not reach him, and knew she could not reach him. And Ruth said that out of the timber, faster than she could understand, faster than anything that size should move, the tall man came down the bank in 3 strides and went into the water to its waist. The water that would have knocked a man down, and it did not go down. And it took Caleb out of the current the way you would pluck a leaf off the surface, one hand, and lifted him up clear of the water and carried him to the bank and set him down. And then Ruth said it looked at her, just for a moment. It looked at her, a 14-year-old girl frozen on the bank, and Ruth said there was nothing frightening in it, that she was not afraid even then, that the look was almost, she said, the look a grown-up gives you when something bad has nearly happened and is over now. A steadying look, a there now look. And then it went back up the bank and into the trees and was gone, and it did not cross out of the timber onto the open ground even to save the boy from the water, because the water was in the timber on its side of the line, and the line still held. Caleb was fine, wet and frightened, more frightened by Ruth screaming than by anything else, because to Caleb, the tall man pulling him from the creek was simply the tall man doing what the tall man did. But Ruth was never the same about it, in a good way. Ruth had been old enough to disbelieve, to have started to fold the blizzard story into the category of things her mother said, and after the creek she believed, and she carried it the rest of her life, and she was the one, at the end, who helped me decide to tell it. 2 of my 4 children would have died without it. I want that to be plain. Caleb twice. Whatever it was, whatever science would call it, if science ever got its hands on it, it reached into my family and held back death 2 separate times and asked for nothing, and kept to its side of a line it drew itself, for no reason I have ever understood except that it chose to. I have told you the good. I need to tell you the fear, because the fear came too, and it did not come from the timber. It came from people. The first time was the autumn of 1996. A hunter came through, out of season for what he was after, and on land he had no business on, the way they did sometimes, working up the drainage behind our place. Daniel met him at the boulder, at the tree line, which Daniel did not think about at the time, but which I have thought about a great deal since, that my husband instinctively went to that line to turn the man back. The hunter said he had seen tracks, big tracks, bear tracks, he said, like a man's but not a man's, too big and too long and too deep, and he had followed them and lost them, and he wanted to know if Daniel had seen anything. Daniel, who could not lie to save his life in any ordinary matter, lied without a flicker. He said it was a bear. Bears leave a track that fools people, he said, especially in soft ground where the hind foot prints over the front. The hunter did not look convinced, but he let it go and he left, and we did not see him again. But that night I sat at the window and watched the tree line and understood for the first time clearly what we were protecting, and what would happen if we failed. Because I knew what people did. I knew what my own neighbors would do, good people, with a thing like that out in the timber. They would not understand it the way we understood it. They would see the size of it, and they would be afraid, and fear with a rifle in its hands does not pause to learn that a thing has rules. And beyond the neighbors, there were others. I knew there were others, the kind of people who would want to know what it was, who would want to measure it and capture it and take it somewhere and open it up to see how it worked, and who would call that science, and who would never once ask whether the thing they had caught had carried a freezing child home at dawn and stood watch at a tree line for years. We made a decision that autumn, Daniel and I, the most important decision of our lives after the decision to have our children. We decided that we would tell no one, not the neighbors, not the family, not the church, not ever. That we would carry it alone, the 2 of us and our children, and that we would teach the children to carry it too, and that we would protect the thing in the timber from the world for as long as we lived on that land. Because it had protected us, and because that is what you do. You keep faith with the one who kept faith with you. The children kept the secret, all 3 of them, their whole lives. I am more proud of that than of almost anything, that 3 children kept a thing that enormous, kept it through school and through friends and through the ordinary cruelty of growing up wanting to fit in and never once told because they understood. They had grown up with it. To them, it was not a monster and not a marvel. It was family. In the strange way, it was family. The relative at the edge of the trees, and you do not sell out family. The fear came back, worse in the years after the children left. Because the children did leave the way children do. Ruth married a man from Kalispell and moved down into the valley. Sarah went to college, the first in our family, and became a nurse and made a life in Spokane. And Caleb, my quiet son, my boy who had been carried home in the snow, Caleb stayed the longest, but Caleb left too. In the end, went to work for the Forest Service of all things, which I have always thought was the tall man's doing in some way I cannot prove. That the boy it kept warm grew up to spend his life in the timber, protecting it, the way his parents had protected the one who lived in it. And as the house emptied, the tall man came less. I think it knew. I think it understood that the children it had watched were gone. That its work, whatever it understood its work to be, was finishing. It still came in the hard winters. It still took what we left at the rock. But the long summer presence, the weight at the edge of the trees, thinned out. And there were weeks, then months, when I felt nothing out there at all. And I grieved those absences in a way I could not explain to anyone, because how do you explain that you miss a thing you have never been able to name? And in those same years, the world pressed in closer. The trail cameras came first. Around 2009, 2010, we began to find them, strapped to trees up the drainage, on public land, but pointed down toward our place, toward the timber behind us. Hobbyists mostly, I think, people who had heard the stories that always circulate in that kind of country, the stories we never confirmed and never denied. Daniel took the batteries out of the ones we found on our side of the line and left them otherwise alone. But they kept appearing, better ones, smaller ones, and then around 2015 there were cameras that I am certain were not hobbyists, that were camouflaged in a way the store-bought ones were not, that sat higher and pointed more deliberately. And once, a man on foot in the timber a half-mile up, who Daniel watched through the binoculars for an hour and who moved. Daniel said, like a man who had been trained to move through country without being seen and who was not hunting anything you could eat. We never knew who they were. I am not going to pretend to you that I know, that I can name an agency or hand you a document. I cannot. What I can tell you is that something changed in those years, that the interest in that stretch of timber stopped being the loose interest of curious locals and became something more patient and more organized and more quiet, and that it frightened me more than the hunter in 1996 had frightened me, because the hunter had been a man I could meet at the tree line and turn back with a story about bears, and this was not a thing you could turn back. This was the world finally, slowly, finding its way up our mountain. Daniel died in 2019, his heart in his sleep, in the bed we had shared for 41 years. I will not say much about that here, except that on the morning I found him, before I had called anyone, before I had done anything at all, I went to the window out of an old habit and looked at the tree line, and it was there, the first time in many months, standing at the boulder in the gray morning, looking at the house. And I understood that it knew, the way it always seemed to know, and that it had come, and I stood at the glass, and we looked at each other across the open ground and the fence and 41 years, and I was not alone in my grief, for that one morning I was not alone. And then it stepped back into the trees, and I went to the telephone and began the business of death. It came to the rock all that following winter, the winter I was alone in the house for the first time in my life. I left more than I should have, given what I had. I think it knew that too. I'm going to tell you why I am telling you this now. It is the reason for all of it, and it happened 3 weeks ago. I am 71 years old. I still live in the house. My children want me to come down out of the mountains to move to the valley near Ruth, and I understand why they want it, and I'm not going to do it. And we have made our peace with that, mostly. 3 weeks ago, in the first week of the new year, with the snow deep and the road barely open, a man came up to the house. Not a hunter, not a hobbyist. A man in a good coat with a vehicle I did not recognize. An expensive vehicle, the wrong vehicle for that road, which meant someone had wanted to come badly enough to risk it. He was polite. He was very polite. He said he represented a research group. He used a word like that, a soft word, and that they had been doing wildlife survey work in the area and that they had gathered some, he paused on the word, some interesting data from the drainage behind my property, and that they would very much like to speak with me about what I might have observed over the years because, he said, I had lived here a long time, and people who live somewhere a long time see things. I have spent 35 years preparing for that man without knowing it. I gave him coffee. I was a harmless old widow who had seen nothing but bears and elk in 50 years on the mountain, and I was sorry I could not be more help. I asked him questions about his work that he did not want to answer, and I watched him decide that I was exactly what I appeared to be. A tired old woman alone in a house too big for her, and he left. I stood at the window and watched his wrong, expensive vehicle slide back down the mountain, and then I sat down at the kitchen table and shook the way I had shaken the morning Caleb came home, because I understood that the world had finally arrived and that it was not going to leave. I was the last thing standing between it and the thing in the timber, and that I was 71 years old, and I would not be standing here much longer. That is when I decided to tell it, all of it, now while I still can. Not to that man and not to anyone like him, to you, to whoever will hear it. Because I have come to believe that the only protection left for the thing in the timber is not silence anymore. Silence was protection when the world did not know. The world knows now, or is coming to know. And against that, silence is just a way of letting them do it quietly. The only protection left is for the truth to be out, plainly in the open, so that if they take it, if they find it and capture it and do to it what such people do, there will at least be this. There will be a record that it was not a specimen, that it was not a missing link, that it was not whatever they will call it in their reports. That it was a person, not a human person, but a person with a mind and a memory and a kind of mercy that I have not found the equal of among my own kind. It carried my son home through a night that should have killed him. It pulled him from the water. It stood watch at the edge of my family's life for 35 years and asked for nothing and kept to a line. It drew out of some courtesy I will never fully understand. It came to my window the morning my husband died so that I would not be alone. These are not the acts of an animal. These are the acts of a neighbor, the oldest and best kind of neighbor, the kind that is simply there at the edge of things, keeping watch, asking nothing. I went out to the boulder yesterday morning. The snow was deep and the cold was hard and the sky was that hard, clear blue it gets. After a storm, the same blue, the exact blue, as the morning my son came home. I left what I had on the rock. I am not going to tell you what, because it is between the two of us, the way it has always been between the two of us. And I stood at the tree line on my side of the line, the way I have stood 10,000 times, and I looked into the timber, into the green dark where the light does not reach, and I waited, the way I have waited my whole life, with the patience that this place and this secret have built into me, bone deep and weatherproof and permanent. And it was there, old now. We are both old now. The dark hair gone gray at the great shoulders, the way Daniel's had gone gray, the way mine has. Moving slower than it moved the morning, it came down the bank into the creek for my son. But there, standing among the trunks where the timber begins, watching me across the small distance and the enormous distance, the few feet of snow and the 35 years. I did not call out to it. We have never needed words, it and I. I put my hand over my heart, the way I have done for years, the only word in the only language we ever shared. And it raised one long arm, slow, and held it there a moment against the dark of the trees, and then lowered it. And then it stepped back the way it always steps back into the timber, onto its own side of the line. And the trees took it, and the morning was just a morning, cold and blue and ordinary. And I was an old woman standing alone at a tree line with her hand over her heart. I do not know what happens now. I do not know if the man in the good coat will come back, or what he and the people behind him will do, or whether the thing that has watched over my family since 1989 will end its long life in the timber where it belongs, or in some place I cannot bear to imagine. I do not have the power to stop any of it. The only power I have left is the power to tell you plainly before I go that it was real, and that it was good, and that it was here. It is still in the mountains behind my house. It is old, and it is slow, and it is alone now, the way I am alone now. And it still comes to the rock when the mornings are right and the snow is deep, and it still keeps to its side of a line that no one made it keep but itself. If you are ever in that high cold country in the northwest of Montana, in the deep timber where the roads give out, and the birds go quiet all at once, and you feel a weight at the edge of the trees, a sense of something large and still and watching. I want you to do one thing for me. I want you to not be afraid. I want you to understand that you have come to the edge of someone's home, and that the someone who lives there has, in all the long years I have known of it, never once done harm to anything that did not first threaten what it loved. Stand at the tree line, put your hand over your heart, and let it watch you the way it has watched over us, from the place where its world touches ours, asking nothing, keeping faith. The oldest neighbor in the oldest house, at the edge of the trees, where it has always been, and where I pray it will be allowed to remain long after I'm gone. That is the whole story. That is everything. I have kept faith with it for 35 years, and now I have kept faith with you. And there is nothing left for me to say except that it was true, all of it, and that I would not change one moment of the strange and frightening and holy thing that walked out of the timber one winter dawn and gave me back my son. He is still out there. He has always been out there, and he knows that I am here.